Welcome back to the Early Weigh-In Podcast. We head over to Las Vegas this week, back to the Apex for UFC Vegas 73. Scheduled for 3 rounds last week, now bumped up to our main event slot. Women's strawweight division here, we see Mackenzie Dern taking on Angela Hill. In our co-main event, we move to the men's middleweight division, where your boy here is banking on some violence. We got Edmen Shahbazyan taking on Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. Brings us to a total of 12 fights this Saturday. A lot of closely lined fights as well, which is always interesting. Makes it tricky when you're placing some bets there. Do us a favor, as we always, we're going to try to break down the best fights, best bets on the card. Like the video, sub to the channel, leave us a comment when you're done watching. As far as last week for us, another big mixed bag of results. Like our recap tweet said, the commission man not going to be missed one bit. A few of those refs not going to be missed either, and it really affected the way both of our nights turned out. As always, go ahead and recap that before we get started.
Yeah, man, back in the casual cap another week in a row, and it's a tough pill to swallow, just knowing that a lot of it was pending upon the judging and the commission on that night for sure. We'll take a look over at your card first. Your only straight bet of the night was Cody Stamann. I thought he fought a really close fight. I'm not really sure if it was a robbery or what, but
stand up in round 1 is what I was most pissed about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where everybody should be focusing on the problem is the ref standing that fight up in the first round. I definitely agree. You also had your biggest bet of the night were 2 different parlays. One of them had Almeida and Carlos Olberg both to win. They both cashed their tickets. Yeah, pretty easy, covered their price tag. And then you had both those fights not to start round 3. And after watching how they played out, I think that both of those were pretty safe parlays. It was your last parlay that didn't hit. The Smith-Walker fight doesn't go the distance, which didn't matter because you were already screwed earlier in the night with the Ji Young Kim fight. You ended up the night coming out pretty much unscathed with a little bit of profit at 0.21 units. And I'm sure that you're pretty happy about that considering how the night went for the majority of fight fans, I guess. Looking over at my card, my only straight bet of the night was Brian Battle at plus 115. I thought he was going to win. I just did not expect him to win like that in the first round. Questionable game plan coming out there from Gabe Green, but happy it cashed and there was zero sweat there. My parlay on the night, like we talked about, it was the Kim that's screwing me over there. Carl Williams, he didn't look minus 400, but I thought that, he did what it took to win, and that's what I was expecting to come out of that fight. My biggest bet on the night was Anthony Smith to win inside the distance. I definitely didn't see the fight going to the judges' scorecards, but I was pretty disappointed in Smith's performance, man. That was not something that I like to see at all, and pretty disappointed that I made that such a big play on somebody like Anthony Smith, who really hasn't had a clean win like I want him to in the UFC. Moving down the card, Ji Young Kim minus 3.5. If the 2-point deductions don't happen, that hits. That's another tough pill to swallow. And then Tim Means, Alex Morono fight doesn't go the distance. Just the wear and tear on Tim Means and the way that Alex Morono fights, I thought that being around even money was a pretty easy play for me. So definitely glad I hit that. Ended up the night minus 3.1 units. And for as bad as I felt like this card was, I guess minus 3 units isn't the worst night for me. So I'm looking to change that in this next card, which we start off in the strawweight division where we see Mackenzie Dern taking on Angela Hill. I'm very, very tempted to say that this is a sub or bust for Dern. The way that her career's played out, it's tough to gauge where she is as a fighter. I think if she can get Hill to the ground, I'm not too impressed with Hill's submission defense, and I'm not confident that Hill would be able to fight her off for more than a few minutes. But if this fight does stay on the feet, I have a hard time believing that Mackenzie has refined her striking skills enough to beat somebody like Hill on the feet. Hill has proved in past fights that her striking skills are on par with the very top of the division, and she's done an excellent job of fighting up to her opponent's talent level regardless of the matchup. It's made for extremely close fights over her career, but it can also be attributed to her far from spotless record. Very rare do you find someone that's 37 years old with 12 professional losses still fighting under the UFC banner. This will be her 7th fight in a row where she's coming in as a betting underdog. And I have to give her credit where it's due. You know, she's done an excellent job in her past 2 fights, keeping the fight on the feet and making her opponents fight her own game. In the Dakota fight that she's just coming off of, I feel like, you know, she was just the bigger of the two. She came out aggressive, and she put up some incredible numbers. Like Angela Hill threw 323 strikes, landed 190 of them, and in 15 minutes, like that's going to be difficult for anybody to overcome. So I actually think that Hill's success was due to the limited game plan of Dakota. I don't think that she had the ability to change that fight up. And then I look at the Loopy fight, and I'll end up touching on this a little bit more, but that was some of the worst game planning from Loopy I've ever seen in my life. You know, she's shooting for all these different takedowns before she gets to this fight, and she fights somebody the level of Angela Hill, and she only shoots 1 time around. She's usually one of those girls who will continue to go back to the well. And, you know, Dern's somebody who I think does know where she holds the advantages, and no matter what, we're going to see her go to those advantages. You know, Dern's ability to find creative ways to bring the fight to the ground has been her best weapons in the UFC, from guard pulling to judo throws to single legs on Nina Nunez to you know, the Yao Nan fight, she's butt scooting and ends up finding the legs and getting the fight to the ground. The Randa Marcos fight, she's slipping up and somehow Randa Marcos follows her to the ground. She just knows how to get the fight where she needs it. And, you know, even in this 5-round fight, I like that. You know, we saw in her last fight against Yao Nan that she was able to still get that takedown in the 5th round. And that's something that I was a little bit worried about going into that fight, how Mackenzie would look over 25 minutes. But oddly enough, I thought that she did okay with one of the very top of the division, and Yao Nan has proved that in her last fight against Andrade. I think that Hill's willingness to engage in the clinch is going to be the downfall of her in this fight. Look at that Verna Jandiroba fight specifically. That first round with Verna, they're in the clinch on the cage. Verna drops to the ground to get a knee bar, which she almost got, almost finished her. The second round, she's able to blast double leg on Hill. And then the third round, all it took was a little bit of cage pressure just to melt Hill. And I think somebody like Mackenzie Dern, who will continually go to the well of trying to get this to the ground, there's going to be opportunities there for her to find the finish. So for me, the pick is Dern, and I do think that she'll find the finish here. How do you feel about this one?
I'm going to end up probably coming out on the same side with you as Mackenzie Dern. I feel she has the clearest path to victory, the finishing upside, the one the UFC seems to want to push in a main event spot here. But I don't know if I'm as confident as we were talking earlier in the week with you. Dern, one of our favorites for a lot of reasons. And I will admit, I have seen improvements on the feet and with her hands. I have seen improvements on the takedown entries. She's tough as nails. You talk about her going out there against Zhao Nan and getting a 10-8 round, I believe, in the 5th round in her one of her first or second, main event spots. She is improving, but realistically, I don't think she is as good as I hope she would be. She does have the skill set of the world-class jiu-jitsu, but I question at the highest level of women MMA how much it's transferred over. She's got 4 wins in the UFC by submission. You know, Amanda Bobby Cooper, Marcos, Cyphers, and even Nina Nunez, none of them in the UFC anymore. She first hurts Cooper on the feet before getting the sub. Marcos follows her to the mat. Hannah Cyphers, I mean, you know, that's a 500 fighter, and a knee bar is an anomaly in MMA as it is, women's MMA. And then you got Nina Nunez, who was coming off of like almost a 2-year layoff from having the baby, has already called it quits in MMA. When she gets to the higher level of girls like Marina and like Zhao Nan, she still has her moments, but at the end of the day, these girls, they do survive with her on the mat, and they do get to the next round where it starts on the feet, and they have their advantages here. And I think Angela Hill kind of sits in the middle of those two girls. She sits in the middle of the level of the Cooper and Marcos, but she's better than them, but I don't think she's as good as Zhao Nan. I don't think she's as good as Marina Rodriguez. She's only been submitted twice in her career. It's been quite a while now, so I'm kind of torn on if I think Dern's going to get this submission here or not. And then you go to the UFC statistics page and you see Mackenzie Dern with an 11% takedown accuracy and Hill with a 77% takedown defense. Dern shooting under 1 takedown per 15 minutes. It's not the statistics that you want to see back in the grappler either, And while Mackenzie has a big edge on the mat, Angie's the far superior striker. You talked about, I think it's 163 significant strikes she lands, 190 total, over 300. That's in 3 rounds. And now you get 5 rounds. If she's able to replicate that performance, it's going to be a hard girl to beat on the scorecard. She has the faster edge, that holds the better footwork. I just think when it's all said and done, we have a close decision on our hands. I think it goes to scorecards at a pretty good clip. And it's going to be where, Angela's given up 8 to 11 minutes of controlled time to Mackenzie. But when it's on the feet, Angela's winning a whole lot of those minutes as well. I just kind of go back to the price tag for a while. Dern was over -200. You throw in the fact that it's a short notice 5-rounder. Hearing her in media day and stuff today, talking about the management change, the change in camps, the divorce. I don't know if her head is in the right spot in this camp as well. So I'm going to be on the side of Mackenzie Dern, but I think it's going to be an easy pass for me. I probably won't have any action on the main event here. Moving on to the co-main event, I will have some action here. We have Edmen Shahbazyan taking on Anthony Hernandez. Now, I honestly think we have a damn good fight on our hands. One, I told you I don't think the judges are going to be needed, and I almost would have been happier if this was our main event slot because I'm really excited about this fight, man. Edmen had me fooled for a while. I really thought the guy was the goods. 11-0, 10 first-round finishes. He's a nasty kickboxer and was really putting away guys with relative ease. Then he runs into Derek Brunson, man, and props to you for taking the big underdog shot on Derek Brunson. Very confident in him. And I didn't see it, man. But Derek Brunson comes through, and I think he showed us a whole lot about Edmen Shahbazyan that night. I think we saw Edmen's got some pretty suspect takedown defense on his back. He doesn't really seem to have a good get-up game, can't threaten with any submission attempts. I thought the gas tank looked pretty rough, and above all of it, man, I thought he showed he had a little bit of quit in him, at that young age, and it's caused him to go on what was a 3-fight losing streak. What I do like to see is a guy addressing those issues, moving over to work with Habib and the guys for his grappling, moving over to Extreme Couture where he's got a wealth of middleweight, welterweight talent that he can work with, and getting back in the win column last time. It's got to be huge for the confidence. You got a 25-year-old who still has plenty of time to put things together. Early in this fight, I think Edmen is going to have his chances. Fluffy is someone who's hittable. Fluffy is someone I think is weak to the midsection, doesn't react well to body shots. But if we see Fluffy coming here with the game plan that he did against Fremd and Marc-Andre Barriault shooting 10-plus takedowns, I think he has the style to cause Edmen some real issues. Use the superior wrestling, superior grass tank, that grit, use that volume to push him back and mix in the takedowns, man. And I think he's equally live to get a finish in this as well. I'm more personally convinced that we see a finish rather than picking a side. But I do have to lean toward, the stylistic advantage Anthony Hernandez has here. So he's going to be my pick in the co-main event.
Yeah, I kind of hold similar sentiments. I think that we see the fight going one of two ways, it's tough to, it's weird because this almost seems like a perfect matchup for Anthony Hernandez. Right. The way that he's been beating these guys, especially the Rodolfo Vieira fight, it's outlasting, surviving that first round, and just dragging his opponents out or deeper into the fight. And you kind of touched on the biggest point I wanted to hit on for Edmen. Yes, he's young, but very rarely do we see fighters that have quit in them turn that around, even if we've seen like super green fighters, I want somebody that will fight for your money through thick and thin, won't give up. And just seeing that from Edmen, regardless of the move, I think that that's like a character trait, and it's kind of going to be tough for him to break. So this is a fight where I think that if he doesn't get that early finish, he'll have the opportunity to prove whether or not he's still going to give up in the middle of his fights. So I do think that this is an excellent co-main event. I'm tempted to play Edmen. Like you said, there's a lot of reasons how the explosiveness of Edson, especially early, could break down Fluffy. But Fluffy being the type of guy he is, the Homer Simpson style fighter where he can take that abuse, it's tough to get on him. So I think the pick, I'm also with you. I think it's Fluffy Hernandez, especially considering that he can throw in the wrestling, mix in the wrestling to kind of get the job done. So yeah, I'll pick Fluffy Hernandez, but not with a lot of conviction. We'll go to the fight of the night, which I'm going with the welterweights, Joaquin Buckley and Andre Fialho. I'm not sure how this fight doesn't produce. Both of these guys coming off of back-to-back losses, and it just feels like both these guys' backs up against the cage, and they need a win here to secure their job. And I think that their fight styles complement each other perfectly. For normally Joaquin is facing guys at 185 pounds, where he's giving up significant size advantage or size to his opponents, and trying his luck down here at a new weight class at 170. And he said in his fighter interview today that he should have been here the whole time, and it's totally understandable why he didn't cut that weight early in his UFC career with the success he was having. But he did note that he feels like he's kept the power even in this transition to welterweight, which I'm excited to see. For Fialho, also kind of still needs to prove himself at this weight class. He's 2-3 in the UFC, and although those 2 wins have been highlights, I think he's still looking for that one true legitimate UFC level guy to get a win over. The Baeza and the Cameron Van Camp fights, they're definitely not aging well. So I do think that a win over Joaquin Buckley here would kind of solidify Fialho as a UFC caliber fighter. When it comes to how I see this fight playing out, I think we have 2 primary strikers that use their athleticism to explode into the shots on the feet. For Buckley, I think it'll be interesting to see him deal with that forward pressure of Fialho as opposed to what we usually see him having to deal with, where he's having to find creative ways to cover the distance. And then Fialho, I'm curious to see how his chin's going to hold up, coming off of 2 KO losses. And judging by his last fights, he's comfortable sticking in the pocket with his opponent to land his shots. That -3 strike differential proves that. And I just think that that's a really scary guy to be doing against. And Joaquin Buckley, probably more powerful than the last 2 guys that he's been knocked out by. So I just think that these guys match up, both being only 29 years old and really needing a staple performance to solidify their jobs is why I made this my fight of the night.
Excellent fight to pick. Think you and I are hoping one of these guys hit the deck in this fight. Fialho, to me, first 3 fights in the UFC, I think he kind of overperformed his expectations. Going to decision with Michel Pereira, went the full 15 minutes, showed some toughness and stuff. And then you talked about his, knockouts over Baeza and Van Camp. Looked good in the first couple fights, man. Now the last 2 times, it's not even a step up in competition really either. Jake Matthews is coming off of a pretty big layoff and comes in there and just floors him, man. When do you see Jake Matthews knocking people out like that? Hardly ever. And then you're talking about a guy in Muslim Salikov who's almost 40, who pretty much beat you so bad that the ref stepped in out of pity. You're still standing up, just taking the shots, the body shots, the spinning back kicks to the face. It was a stoppage out of pity, man. And while it shows he can take a shot, he doesn't wear them too well, and as he gets out of round 1, I think the guy becomes a pretty stationary target with his hands low, and he's just too comfortable walking forward, getting in those brawls with the bad defensive tendencies that he has. Buckley in a difficult spot as well, coming on an L2, but I do think he's fought a stiffer competition by far, and we talk about up a weight class. Talk about athlete-wise in the UFC, one of the better athletes we've seen in the UFC in a while. He's got the better gas tank here. He's been one of the more active guys on the roster. When it comes to durability, they've both been knocked out a few times, but I think I do favor the durability of Buckley a little bit more. And he, to me, is just a better fighter at range with more tools, more volume, and if needed, the one that I think is more capable of mixing things up a little bit. The one red flag is kind of that weight cut down to 170. But I think he's done it before. I think it's been about 5 or 6 years, right?
He said in the fighter interview today that he's walking around today at 178 and that he's not worried about the weight cut at all. He said he changed up his dieting and his discipline's been on point.
And you hear him on the embeddeds, I think, when he was on a pay-per-view a couple months back, his coaches going through the grocery store like, we don't even have to tell this guy what to do. He's as disciplined as he comes, very easy to coach. And this is something I think you and I have talked about since the last couple fights, always thinking he's a little bit undersized, coming in weighing 182 on the scale and stuff like that. I think this could be a move for Buckley that pays off for him. I do wish I would have got the -175. I think it's trended to like -220 now. Probably would have maybe put a little pick on Buckley there, but I like some violence in this spot. I like Buckley to get it done, man. And then we move on to my fight. I went with Maheshate versus Slava Borshchev. Striker's delight. I don't see wrestling being a big factor in this one. I think both guys are extremely happy to get another striker standing across the cage for them. I think it's going to produce some fireworks. Maheshate, big lightweight, dude, 6 foot tall, only 23 years old as well, still improving. The guy hits really hard, just ask Steve Garcia. Nice counter striker, and he's got some good long-range weapons to keep his range as well. But, man, I do think he has some defensive liabilities. I think he gets hit a little bit too cleanly for my liking, and I think Slava's the far more versed striker of the two. And there's zero indication that Maheshate is going to wrestle at all. He's not shot a takedown in the UFC, and if you're going to tell me that, man, it's kind of an easy bet on Slava at this number. I think he's a far more technical guy. He mixes up his strikes, mixes up his levels. He's the faster of the two. I love how the guy works the body to start his combinations, and he's got a 6 foot tall guy with a long torso to aim at here. Long kickboxing background. I think he's a coach at Team Alpha Male. And, at 5'11", he's got some pretty damn good size for the weight class. Strong finisher. And a guy here with his back up against the wall. I'm expecting a smart approach. I'm expecting a great shape, Slava Claus here. And he's getting a matchup that I think favors him. One he can shine in, one where he can get his strikes going. And I think we could see a finish again. It's these mediocre cards that people let fly under the radar that always produce the violence here. And I think Slava could put this guy away, man. I think both sides of the podcast are on Slava this week.
Yeah, very rarely do you see, 2-unit type confidence in a 6-3 fighter like we do here in Slava Claus. But like you said, I don't see this fight being the same type of fight that Slava's been having to deal with. I think they're finally giving him a favor here in Maheshate. And he said it himself in the fighter interviews, if this was a kickboxing fight, he'd be the world champion by now. But mixing in the wrestling, I would not be surprised if we see Slava Claus shoot for a takedown. I know that's where he's been focusing. And I think if the opportunity presents itself, we'd actually see him get a takedown or two, which would be pretty cool. So yeah, I'm happy that both sides of the podcast are on him. We move on to my fighter to watch. This one, it's annoying breaking down this fight or breaking her fights down because she's just abandoned her game plan at the peak of her career. My fighter to watch is Lupi Godinez. And in her last few fights, man, she's come out with some of the worst game plans I've ever seen. You look at her career and, against Silvana Gomez, she goes 5 of 6. She goes 5 of 6 in the Luana Carolina fight. She's shooting for 15 takedowns. In the Loma Lookboonmee fight, she's going 5 of 12, but she's still shooting for 12 takedowns. Goes 8-8 against Carnelossi. Yeah. And then what does she do in the Hill fight? She comes and tries to stand and bang. She shot for 3 takedowns technically, but truthfully, they were all really half-ass shots. Yeah. Just think somebody who's had so much success in the UFC going to her wrestling to just give it up at this point in their career is frustrating to watch as a fan. I'm expecting Lupi to go back to her wheelhouse at 29 years old and get a win. I mean, her last win against Cynthia Calvillo, it wasn't she didn't cover her price tag. It wasn't the type of performance I expect that she wanted. And I think, when you look at the type of girls who are able to beat her over her career, the Jessica Penays, the Luana Carolina, Angela Hill, they're all longer girls, and I think that might be where she's struggling in the wrestling department and getting these girls to the ground. But somebody like Emily Ducote, who's only 5'2", if she goes to that wrestling, I think that she could easily ground Emily over 15 minutes, even though this is a short notice fight. It's not like Ducote was the one who was pushing for this up a weight class like we saw Luana Carolina whenever they did their catch weight. So I'm all over Lupi Godinez here. I think -150 is a gift and a buy low spot on a much better fighter. Emily Ducote's looked good in her past few fights, but she's doing it against girls who I don't think are anywhere close to the level that Lupi can be. So Loopy is my fighter to watch. I really hope that she produces on Saturday.
I think I'm on the other side just ever so slightly. But the reason I haven't pulled the trigger, you didn't really talk about it. It's the Kanako Murata fight with with Emily Takote. If Loopy does come out here and sticks to the game plan, she could make it look like that fight, win a lot of minutes on top. Great fighter to watch, man. If she does come in here and put things together, that minus 150 could be a gift. Fighter to watch for myself, I'm going to go with Chase Hooper. It seems like him and Nick Fiore is like the most heavily debated fight on Twitter this week. Chase is moving up for 155, and I think it's understandable. I don't really take any negatives from it. He's already a massive featherweight as it is, and at his age, he's just going to get bigger and start to fill out his frame. And the 145 cut, it was going to be something he had to move on from eventually. He's coming off that loss to Steve Garcia. And it was a bad one, man. He's dropped and hurt numerous times in the opening minutes of that fight. He showed us yet again that he's yet to patch up, the striking defense, that he's really just solely focused on his jiu-jitsu. And he's got some pretty slick jiu-jitsu. The guy's been training it since he was a young kid. But I don't really think he has a lot in his striking to set up those injuries. I don't think he has a lot of the wrestling to get his opponents down. A lot of them rely on, just like scrambles and stuff to get him there. And from what I've seen with Nick Fiore so far, he's going to take the fight to Chase Hooper's area where Chase Hooper can potentially have success. Nick hasn't really shown the best gas tank to me, hasn't shown me a ton off his back. He's coming in here with like half the fights of Chase Hooper, which is pretty rare for Chase's occurrence. And the guys he has fought, Jay Ellis is on there twice. A lot of these guys don't even have winning records. The one time he does take a step up, it's a giant step up against Rebecca. And that's a guy who I think is going to smash Chase Hooper as well. So to me, it's an extremely, extremely hard fight to get a read on. I'm shocked so many people have so much conviction and are betting it this week. I lean more toward plus money, Chase being in his area. So Chase Hooper going to be my fighter to watch this week.
I think that's an excellent pick. The UFC's put so much investment into like his media presence and everything. It seems like they really are scraping the bottom of the barrel to try and give Chase Hooper a win here. It's just he's got to fight up to the level of competition. He's been in the UFC long enough now to where him not filling out to his frame or whatever excuse that we've been making for him in the past just isn't going to cut it anymore. Right. And if he can't get this Fiore win, it's probably deuces for Chase Hooper sooner rather than later. So excellent fighter to watch for sure. My underdog of the card, absolutely getting slammed this just today. It's actually Vanessa Little Monster Demopoulos, who's now plus 110 across the board. She had been sitting at plus 125 all week. Yeah. I actually still haven't made a play on her. And, I'll get into the reasons why. With Little Monster, I think that she is not that good of a fighter. I think she is lucked up. And if you were to tell me, before she got into the UFC in 2022 that she was going to be on a 3-fight win streak she got into the UFC in 2021. But if you had told me that in 2022 she'd be on a 3-fight win streak in the UFC, I'd have laughed you off, thought you were crazy. But she has found it, even if they've been close, like the Jin Yu Fry fight. She's been able to put together 3 UFC wins. And although the talent, questionably UFC talent that she's been beating, it's hard to argue with her success. It's similar to like when I see Sam Hughes win fights. It's like it's odd seeing Sam Hughes win at a high level, but it's happening. So she's got Carolina here, and I feel like it's a bad fighter on a good win streak versus an aging fighter who I also think was never really at the level that we seem to think she was whenever she initially came into the UFC. I think a lot of her success was just the fact that she had fought Joanna on the amateur scene before getting into the UFC, and then it was a way to market her to give a challenger to Joanna. Since she's come back after her 5-fight losing streak, she's probably fought 2 girls that I think are worse than Vanessa Demopoulos. And that's something that you have to take into consideration breaking this fight down, is that Felice Herrig was like whatever, 36 coming off of double ACL tears. And it's that win doesn't mean anything. It means far less than the 3 wins that Vanessa's been able to put together. And then Silvana Gomez Juarez, KK's taking her to decision. Vanessa's finishing her. This is low level stuff. So I kind of I don't break this fight down skill for skill too much. It's just, I think Vanessa's going to be able to put on the pressure and the pace. And the way that I've seen Carolina deal with that recently, I just feel like she's not in the game for the love of it anymore. She has that quit in her. And maybe fighting isn't where she wants to be right now. It's more of just something that she can do for an easy paycheck. So I'm going Vanessa Demopoulos here. I'd like to see her do the splits one more time in the octagon. I got a little monster.
Jump up in old Bisbing's arms.
Yeah.
I hold some different thoughts about that fight. I'll actually touch on it in a little bit. Underdog for me, I'm going to go with Michael Johnson. I think this card is actually filled with 3 or 4 or 5 underdogs that I think could cover their price tag. This is the one I was most confident in betting, though. I got the younger guy. I got the faster, superior athlete, far better striker, better boxer. MJ has good finishing upside as well, which I told you last week is something I really like to look for if I'm going to take a shot on an underdog, is if they can finish the fight, not just make it close. And I think for MJ, after the last couple performances, I think he's gotten some confidence back to him. On the side of his opponent, Diego Ferreira, we're talking about a 38-year-old who's not fought in over a year, a guy who's been sidelined dealing with multiple injuries, a guy who I do feel is pretty one-dimensional. I think he has to get MJ down to have a lot of success here. I think he doesn't really have much for MJ in the boxing. And then I'm like 99% sure CDF is a guy John Anik is always talking about, traveling hours from far Texas over to Fortis MMA to get good training in. And man, looking online, I see zero indication of that at all during this camp. I haven't seen one work at Fortis MMA. It looks like he's only doing work out of his own BJJ gym that he's got. While Michael Johnson's down at Killcliff in Sanford, man, he's working every day with Gilbert Burns. You hear Ian Gary in his post-fight interview talking about Michael Johnson being a big part of his camp to prepare for Daniel Rodriguez. This guy's getting twice the work in, man. I know he looks good until the wheels fall off, and I really have to, factor that into my capping, even when I like him in a matchup. But I think this fight is a 50-50 fight. I got one unit on Michael Johnson at plus 130 for my underdog this week.
I don't hate it, man. Very rarely do you see a 38-year-old on an L3 coming in as the favorite. It's weird to think that Michael Johnson has youth on this guy, but it is the case. And the fact that he's been able to put up 2 wins in his last 3, I love that as your underdog of the week. So good stuff. Moving on to our prop of the podcast. Mine I'm going with is the under 2.5 in the Buckley versus Fialho fight. I just think this fight screams violence. It was the reason why I picked it as my fight of the night. And I think both of these guys, it's going to be like 2 trains coming in, crashing into each other, man. You got somebody in Fialho who's willing to stay inside the pocket. And I think somebody like Buckley with his explosions, it's going to be too much for Fialho. Fialho doesn't take shots very well when he does get cleanly hit. And on that same token, I think Buckley, I said it is going to be interesting seeing how he fights where he doesn't have to close the distance on a much bigger guy. I think when he is throwing his shots, Fialho's fast enough, especially in the early rounds, that he could catch somebody like Buckley overextending on his shots, which is why I like the under 2.5 as opposed to just taking Buckley inside the distance. But yeah, I think that both these guys, just the way that they fight and the position that they're in with the L2, it's set up for the under to hit here, and getting it at minus 175. It just seemed like extreme value.
Yeah, texted you earlier today. These guys combined for a finish rate of 76%. You're getting the under at 63%. That's a play that's on both of our cards this week, man. I like that. The prop for me, I'm going to go to our co-main event, taking Shahbazyan versus Fluffy Hernandez under 2.5. That's sitting at minus 160. There's a bunch of reasons that I do like a finish here, man. First being just the stylistic matchups. We got Fluffy, who does struggle with good kickboxers, guys who are good in the clinch, guys who throw a ton of kicks to the body. That's something Edmen's going to have, especially early on in this fight. And I think he has his chances to finish Fluffy. But as it progresses, I think things like heavily start to favor Fluffy. You know, the better gas tank, the big wrestling edge, submission upside. Rounds 2 and 3, I think Edmen's in some real trouble if Fluffy is still there. Then you look at just the finishing history of the two guys. They combine for an 86% finish rate. Minus 160 implies 61%, man. You and I talking earlier today, realistically, we think it finishes somewhere between about 70 to 75%. I think there's still some good value on that minus 160 for the under 2.5 there. It's going to be my prop in the co-main this week.
Yeah, I like it. I definitely see how that could hit. I have difficulty tailing it myself just because I feel like Hernandez's game plan coming in here is to drag the fight out. So it might get sketchy towards the end, but I could see both sides having the ability to hit that under 2.5, which is important when playing the unders like that. Looking at my best bet of the card, it's tough, but as this line continues to move down, it's hard not to make it Mackenzie Dern, man. I know that we've already touched on her a little bit, but I think that there's a lot of people putting a lot of stock in the 11% takedown efficiency from Mackenzie Dern, and they're just not looking at the fact that that's not, at least up until this point, her main path to getting the fight to the mat, man. You know, she uses these alternative methods, and although they don't work, especially in the upper levels of MMA, like we kind of saw Kron and Kron in his last fight against Jourdain, using the butt scoot. And while that won't fly in the upper levels of men's MMA, it does fly in the the upper levels of women's MMA. And I just think that Hill is going to give Dern the opportunity to get the fight to the mat. She said in her fight interviews today that she's confident that she can hang with Dern on the mat. I think that she's undervaluing how good Mackenzie Dern is on the mat just because of her recent string of not being able to get the finish. At the end of the day, as much as Hill is better than Dern on the feet, Dern is 40 times better than Hill on the ground. And I really do think that Hill's going to be putting herself into some vulnerable positions if she's willing to engage with Mackenzie on the ground, which she says that she is. So all that being put into it, and then how many people are on Angela Hill, I think they're just expecting Hill to make this fight close like she always has. But this isn't another striker that she's going to have that ability to have the chance to keep it on the feet. I think Dern's going to win with control time, and if she doesn't find the finish, she'll win a pretty convincing fight.
I like to hear it, man. Best bet for me, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, man, minus 140. Sucker for some women's MMA. Sucker for it, man. I said I was done if Kim lost. Finds a way to win the fight and still loses it, man. If that doesn't scream women's MMA, I don't know what it does. But it was hard for me to pass on a fight where I still see some value on the line. As far as experience goes, you know, it's all in Karolina's favor. You're talking about a girl who's fought for the belt, fought 5 rounds, fought a much better brand of competition. And if this fight is on the feet, I think it's truly a night and day difference. I think Karolina is levels above Vanessa in the striking. The Muay Thai is on a different level. And I truly think it's an easy 30-27 for Karolina if it's on the feet. I think Vanessa does have to mix things up. But Karolina, man, on paper, rocking a 77% takedown defense. I've never seen a fight in Karolina's history where she's just neutralized and stuck on bottom. You know, she's a girl who's now rounding out her game, landing takedowns herself, and really truly only lost to some of the best girls in the world. And, you know, the slip up against Panay coming back, it was a mental slip up, hurting her, falling her to the ground. And in my opinion, I think Panay is twice the black belt of Vanessa on the mat. I truly think that. I think Karolina's got some confidence back to her. And for me, Demopoulos, she feels like a meme armbar or bust here to me. I don't like her minute winning ability here. She could have arguably lost that fight against Jinyu Frey. But what I do want to give her props to, where she doesn't lack in skill, the girl makes up for it in effort and grit. She does not mind making a fight dirty. And that will win you fights in women's MMA a lot of times. I just don't think it's this one. I think she struggles to get her game plan going. I think the takedowns are unsuccessful, and I think she's going to lose all these exchanges on the feet. I got Karolina by a pretty comfortable decision, I think, man.
All right, making it your best bet of the card. I like it. We'll move on to the quick pick section of the pod where we start off in the welterweight division. Takashi Sato taking on Thimba Garimbo. I'm on the Garimbo side here. It is dead even across the board. Yeah, the Garimbo submission is obviously the one that's sticking out, but
Yep.
not confident enough to play it, just being where it's positioned on the card and how much we've actually got to see of these guys at a high level. So Garimbo's the pick. I might find a play on it later on in the week, but it won't be more than a unit.
It does seem like the style does lean heavily in the favor of Themba to bank minutes with the grappling. And I just want to throw in the fact that Sato is coming off a bad knockout. Like, you know, slept with a head kick, man. That's always a pause for concern. You saw Court McGee, knocked out for the first time in I think maybe his career, thought it was maybe an anomaly and gets slept again. You just don't know when they're coming off a bad knockout if it's going to be a repeat. I'm going to go with Themba Garimbo as well. Women's flyweight, Victoria Leonardo, Natalia Silva, biggest favorite on the card. Natalia Silva, I think she opened like minus 550, and now she's like a minus 1,000. I'm not going to touch it, but I think the girl has a very, very high ceiling. I really do. She's not lost in a long time. I think she's got a very rounded game, rounded skill set, and I think she's going to be Victoria Leonardo.
Yeah, I don't know. The books also don't know how this one's going to be finished. You look at the method of victories for Silva, and they're all decision, KO, and submission within plus 135 to plus 180. It's like they also don't know how it's going to go down, but they sure know that Silva is going to get the nod here. So I'm with you. I'm also on the Natalia Silva side, just being a more well-rounded with a ton of potential on her side as well. Moving up on the card, we go to the lightweight division where we see Chase Hooper taking on Nick Fiore. I do feel like this is a setup fight for Chase Hooper. It's hard not to look at it that way. Just like I said, the marketing that's been invested in Chase Hooper up until this point, it just seems like they're really trying to get him a win here. It's just he's got to prove it, being in the UFC for like 3 years at this point.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of winnable fights going forward in this division for Chase, but it does seem like the UFC has done everything in their power to find someone to get him back on track. Going with Chase Hooper as well. Alir Latifi taking on Rodrigo Nascimento. Man, it's a fight I didn't put a ton of tape study in. I missed the line badly on Nascimento. Maybe I take a stab at minus 155, now north of minus 200. He's got the physicals, the age. Everything sides with him. He's the pick, but very little conviction, man.
Yeah, man, it's hard to get behind Latifi after he teases retirement after his last fight. Being 38 years old, it's tough. You just want to side with the guy with a little bit more size and the youth on the Nascimento side. But like you said, the line's kind of gotten away from us. So my pick is also Nascimento, but with you, not with a lot of conviction. Moving down to the welterweight division, Orion Kosi taking on Gilbert Urbina, and another one that's probably one of the more mushy dogs of the card. I've seen a ton of people on Gilbert Urbina, a ton of people that I respect on Gilbert Urbina, and I personally don't know why. I was telling you before the podcast started that I might not have gotten there, but I was at least leaning on the side of Orion Kosi at minus 155. And now that he's getting all the way down to pick'ems, and by the looks of it, come fight night, he might end up being an actual dog. I feel like Kosi is the side here. I understand that there's a lot of what ifs with the layoff and him showing the cardio issues in the past, but nothing impresses me about Gilbert, to be honest with you. So I do think we're getting a buy low spot on Kosi. I'll go with him.
Yeah, Koski are the brothers, kind of known for gassing, but this is one who's got, I think, 2 or 3 round 3 finishes. I think Orion is definitely the better of the two, but there is an interview out there this week where he's talking about, reactions to the vaccine, not really agreeing with his body. I don't know how good the camp is. I don't know how good a performance he's going to be. You got Gilbert, who's the bigger guy. Looked good against Brian Battle in round 1, man, until he just, took it on short notice and didn't really have the gas tank. I think we might have our first disagreement. I'm gonna side with Gilbert Urbina, but yeah, it's an easy pass for me on that fight. Karolina Kowalkiewicz taking on Vanessa Demopoulos. Someone said it best on Twitter this week. Karolina doesn't lose to an escort. Never has, never will. Karolina for the win.
I just think I think Vanessa's got the style to put the pressure on somebody like KK, who I feel like has a foot out the door already, and we'll take that opportunity to an opportunity to get out of the fight if it's presented to her. So I'm on the Vanessa Demopoulos side. I can't make the play on her at plus 110, so I might not get on her on the card, but I got her to win. Maheshate, moving up to the lightweight division, Maheshate versus Viacheslav Borshchev. We're on the Slavakos side.
Yep.
We do think it's going to be a standing bout, and yeah, I think that it's Borshchev all day. We're getting another buy low spot and somebody who's just been given some tough matchups to start his UFC career.
Hell yeah. I mean, DeCasey, Mike Davis, my goodness, man. Yeah. World's better than Maheshate and can mix up the game world better than Maheshate. Yeah. Both sides of the podcast on Slava Claus this week. Kicking off the main event, Michael Johnson, Diego Ferreira. My underdog this week, man. I do think there's some value on Michael Johnson's line. I think he's faster. I think he's better on the feet, finishing upside. You throw in the layoff and injuries. I think plus 130 is a little generous, and he's going to be the pick, man.
Yeah, we're disagreeing here. Not with a lot of conviction. I just feel like Michael Johnson's kind of shown he struggles with some wrestlers in the past, and I know that Diego's just going to try and get it to the ground. Being 38 years old, it's tough to trust him, and then the losing streak, but it's also really tough to trust Michael Johnson. Shoot, he's given you 1,000+ reasons why you shouldn't in his career. So I'm going to take the guy with 5 losses instead of 18 in this close matchup right here.
He's the best 18-loss fighter there is, though.
Yeah, maybe so. Andre Fialho taking on Joaquin Buckley at welterweight. I'm all over Joaquin here. I actually really like his by decision only. You touched on if he does decide to mix in the wrestling. I think that's the only way that we see the overhit on this. But if it does get to the scorecard, I expect Buckley to put up twice the numbers in the striking and also have the wrestling advantage. Yeah, Joaquin's the pick.
Joaquin's the pick for your boy as well. And the under 2.5 on both of our cards. I think we will have another disagreement here. 120 catch weight for the women's. I'm going to slide with Emily Ducote. I'm going to take her by decision. I've almost pulled the trigger at plus 250. I think this fight goes to decision at a very, very high clip, and I can't bank on Loopy to wrestle. If she comes out here and tries to have a striking battle like what she did with Calvillo, who's on like a 5-fight losing streak, I think Emily can make it close, man, and that's all I can ask when I'm taking an underdog shot. So I'm going to go with Emily Ducote.
Yeah, I think that I would agree. If Loopy doesn't come out here and wrestle, it's going to be a whole lot closer than I would like for it to be. But I do think that Loopy's going to come out here and wrestle, and that sounds ridiculous after seeing her last 2 performances. But I do think that she knows that she holds the edge there, and Ducote 12-7. She's super short. I don't think that she's going to be able to stuff the takedowns like Loopy's last few losses have been able to. So Loopy's the pick there. Moving on to the co-main event, Edmen Shahbazyan taking on Anthony Hernandez. I really want to bet Shahbazyan, and I think there's like value on early plays for Edmen, but I think that Anthony Hernandez is going to be able to withstand that early pressure, drag the fight out, and get the finish, or at least win 2 of the rounds.
I hope he gets the finish. I got the under 2.5 there. I'm siding with Hernandez. But you talk about Edmen's early round props. I mean, you can get his for just round 1 greater than like plus 700 on some of these books. And I think all but one of his wins are by round 1 knockout. That's his path to victory. That's a phenomenal price tag if you want to take it. But both of us on the other side with Fluffy. And in the main event, Mackenzie Dern, Angela Hill. Dern opened at like minus 180 and people hit her all the way up to minus 200. And then now it's a big bomb that's been dropped on Angela, and we can get Mackenzie Dern even better than what she opened up, man. It's I see respectable opinions on both sides. I slightly lean Dern, but I'm going to pass.
Yeah, man. I think that this is a setup fight for Dern. She's come short in her last 2 main events that she's been in. And I do think that this is an opponent that'll give her the fight that she wants. And I think she'll break that little streak of her not being able to find the submission win. And she'll kind of prove to us how much better she is at jiu-jitsu than any other girl in this division.
Would love to see it. Finishes the breakdown, 12 total fights this week. Hopefully they all stay together on Friday. Hopefully we gave out some good fights, some good betting spots, and we'll see you guys next week.
Peace.